Rents have been going up, and we're seeing a detrimental impact to our older population who no longer can afford a one-bedroom unit that now is around $1,200 a month. The county's plan focuses on housing first, an intervention that connects people experiencing homelessness to permanent housing through a tailored package of assistance. And this approach reduces trauma for not only the homeless individual, but the families that try to care, and the family and friends that try to care for these homeless individuals. It increases the effectiveness of the supportive services that we deliver throughout our community, and you'll hear more about that. And it's very cost effective for our community. We are constantly asked why we are not building more emergency shelters in Washington County. That is a very expensive intervention. A family of 4 staying 5 weeks in our homeless shelter cost us over $10,000. The county funds the bulk of our shelters through a levy and other funds, and we're looking to use our tax dollars in a very effective manner, because shelters does not end homelessness. It takes housing to end homelessness. 93% of the people that we put into permanent supportive housing or permanent housing retain their housing or exit to other independent housing on their own, never needing assistance again. 93%. As compared to 57% who stay in our shelter system, only 57% exit to housing. The others go back to the street or end up in another shelter or another emergency program. So persons coming through our continuum of care are assessed on their strengths, their economic ability to become self-sufficient, their health care and other needs that they need in order to access housing and move forward. This is what we call as our referral from Community Connect to the most appropriate program, putting the right person with the right program for the right amount of time to achieve success, not only for the individual, but for our community as a whole. And those programs are many, just like the Dorf program that we're talking about this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Annette. So before we go on to the next speaker, I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about the homeless project, so you understand sort of where the purpose of this, the county, is coming from. But for a moment, I want to go back to this. So these, again, were key comments that we heard. What I'd like you to do is, many of you have white cards. If you don't, I ask you to seek out one of our staff, and I think they're all at the table at the moment. Somewhere during this time, grab a white card. If we've missed a key topic, we want to know what it is. Is there some other topic that you would like to see addressed?
Why can't this be built for families? You met this woman that just spoke twice about families, but not once about single males or females living in our community. So why isn't families part of that?
Thank you.
Homeless families.
So we'll capture that, and I think Julie will, or I will, but thank you. So thank you for speaking out. I do want to hold questions. I'm sorry, sir, I want to hold questions to the end. We want to address all of these issues that you've already asked questions about to begin with. As we get through the presentation, then we would like to open it up for other questions, and by the same token, those cards, we won't answer every question. Pass those cards over. There's a few things we're going to do. We're going to try and capture these themes. We're going to try and respond to the questions as we can. If we can get through the presentation efficiently, we'll give more time to public questions. And I also want to alert you that you have, that blue sheet has a website address that you can track the process. We'll give you a couple of other website addresses. And if you gave us your email address on the sign-in sheet, we will send you a notice when the decision process begins, so that you have opportunity to provide testimony and input at that point.
So
So,
Can you tell us who you are and you're speaking on behalf of? A lot of us missed it.
yes. So I'm Mike Dahlstrom. I'm with Washington County. I'm the manager of the Community Engagement Program. We have a panel to represent several of the departments of Washington County to respond to some of these issues, and we have representatives from Dorf to respond to your questions and issues. So I'd like to go ahead and proceed.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chrissy Bollinger, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm the county's property manager. So my role in property management is to manage the county's portfolio, and that can be acquiring property or dispositioning or selling property or transferring property. So I'm here tonight to speak about the potential transfer of this property. There's been a lot of questions that have, and comments that have come in from individuals inquiring about individuals wanting to purchase the property. So it's important that we speak to this and help everybody understand that there is a process and that we do follow. So what we do periodically is we review the properties in our portfolio, the county's portfolio, to determine those that could be used to further public interest. So what happens periodically is we compile a list and we distribute them to appropriate county departments. So in the case of the 170th and Bainey property, that property was on a list that went to Washington County Housing Services, and they determined that as a potential fit for the Dorf project. Further, if a county department opts out of acquiring a property, it then is offered out to local agencies like cities, etc. And then if the county departments or an agency is not of interest of a property, then we would offer it to nonprofits that provide affordable housing. So from that point, if a property makes it through that process and it's not acquired by any of those three, then it can be offered through a public auction process. So that's a state law that I'll speak to a little bit in a moment, but it's a state law and it's also rules that are adopted by the county. So that's the only way that really it can go to the public is through public auction. Interested private parties are encouraged to provide contact information to me, and I can notify you of the next public auction. I brought a handful of business cards, and I'd be happy to hand those out if anybody has interest to be added to that list.
Was there ever an auction?
Auction for this particular property? No, this property's never been offered at auction.
How much is it?
So this,
What are you looking for?
actually, let me answer this gentleman's.
So I'll reiterate that I ask your consideration for 2 ground rules: that we be respectful to everyone at all times, and that we be patient. So this is a state process. This is a state process. So thank you, and I do encourage you to write your questions down. We will try to get to them.
We don't want the project. Give us a part like you said you would.
So if you'll give us a chance. Thank you. So I'm going to respectfully ask you not to do this, because these are your community members. There are people here who support it, and there are people here who have concerns. This is an opportunity to not polarize your community. So I ask you to be respectful to everyone.
So I'd like to continue. That's okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So to answer your question, sir, the property was acquired in
Thank you,
2001
sir.
for a road
Thank you.
widening project. So moving on. So the disposition process differs depending on how the property was acquired. So this particular property was acquired through land use and transportation as a road widening project, for a road widening project. And Oregon Revised Statute 271.310 through 271.330 speaks specifically on how this property can be transferred or dispositioned. Ultimately, the Board of County Commissioners determines whether to authorize the transfer of property. Public hearing is not required by law, but is planned for this property in the best interest of full transparency. There's a range of restrictions that a nonprofit is required to provide. One is low-income occupancy requirements, guaranteed affordability for life of the structure, appropriate community and neighborhood information, and deed restriction and reversionary clause. And what that means is that if a property is deeded to a nonprofit, we put a deed restriction indicating that it needs to be used for the purpose, in this case would be for affordable housing, for the life of the property. And if anything was to change, the ownership would automatically revert back to the county. Additionally, federal funding may also require housing services to conduct annual inspections, monthly status reports provided to housing services, and affirmative furtherance of fair housing statutes. Thank you very much.
Stephen Roberts is the Interim Assistant Director of Department of Land Use and Transportation. He'll be addressing some of the community notification as well as the development processes that you have asked about.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So,
next door, not for you guys.
Nope.
So if you'll give us a chance to talk about the process, we'll be happy. These are questions and comments that you've already brought up. We'd like to address those first to make sure we are. Thank you.
do you want to address that?
Oh, no, we are staff. Sorry, we are not elected officials. This is not a decision-making meeting. This is a meeting to provide everyone here with the same level of information. Again, I encourage you because you have already shown compassion, interest, and involvement in this community. No decision has been made. Those decisions are coming up. This is the opportunity to understand what those decisions are, when those decisions will be made, and how you can provide your input to meaningfully inform this decision with your Board of County Commissioners. So I ask for your patience as we get through the questions and comments that you've provided to date. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. And I'm here tonight from Land Use and Transportation. I want to just chat with you a little bit about the existing land use designation of the property, what uses are permitted on the property, and then if this project does go forward, what would be the review process that it would go through. Okay. Okay. Is that better? Okay. So I just want to run through, as I said, just quickly, the procedures that this project would go through, review process, if it moves forward, and then very quickly what the land use district allows on the property as it stands today. So this is just an aerial photo of the site. I assume you're all familiar with it, but it's at the corner of Bainey and 170th. As Christy mentioned earlier, it was acquired by the county as part of the 170th Avenue Improvement Project in the early 2000s and has been vacant since then. Just a close-up of the property, you'll notice there are some existing trees on the property. It does have abutting single-family residences around it, and there is some missing sidewalk on Bainey Road. As the project develops, the property develops, that would be completed as a condition of the development review. So a land use map. So the property is designated R5. R5 just means that it's zoned primarily for residential uses. The maximum density of those units would be 5 units per acre. You can see some of the abutting properties. The color doesn't pick up very well, but you'll see on the map there are some properties in proximity that are R6, residential, up to 6 units per acre. Just across the street on the south side where the church is and some existing residences, it's R15. so residential up to 15 units per acre. You can see because the church is in a residential zone, there are things like schools, parks, and churches are permitted in the R5 district as well.
You know when it was changed to R5?
In the early 1980s, I assume, when we adopted the most current
Subdivision in
community.
that area, 10 years ago, it was R7. Then all of a sudden, I just went into R5. I wasn't notified, and I lived right next door.
Okay.
Need to repeat what he's saying.
Yes, so, and this is part of, so I invite you to have that discussion on the aside. So the question was, this gentleman said that this was previously identified as R7. This is in part of the Cooper Mountain, Aloha Reedville community plan that was first developed in 1983. We're uncertain if it was R7, but it is now R5 and has been since, I believe, you've been aware of it.
I believe it was zoned in the early 1980s when the Aloha Reedville community plan was adopted.
Can you give the definition of a unit?
Sure, a unit is one residential unit.
So one single family, so it's like one apartment or one house?
Yes, the question was what constitutes a unit when we talk about units per acre. So that is one independent dwelling unit, so one standalone apartment or a single family house, yes.
And how many would that whole house? How many would one unit house?
So let me just run through this, and I know there will be questions. So the purpose of the R5 district, it's our lowest density residential district. As I mentioned, it has a 5 acre per unit maximum. There's a 4 acre per unit minimum. This property is 1.28 acres, so a minimum of 5 units are required and a maximum of 6 units are allowed on the property. Duplex units, in other words, 2 attached units, are permitted in the R5 zoning district. They do require what we call a type 3 plan development process. So I've got, before we go too much further, these arrived a little bit late, so many of you won't have these, but there are copies at the back table. It's a little process overview of the county's land use review process. There's a chart inside that I'll be showing you up here. And then there's a larger version of it on an easel near the back of the room somewhere. So I invite you to grab one of these brochures on your way out if you don't have one yet. And I'll walk through some of these steps for you as a part of my presentation. So duplexes, which is what is being proposed by Dorf, are permitted. Again, they require a type 3 land use review. That's the most intensive type of review that we have, and it provides the most opportunities for public involvement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. As a planned development, there would be a minimum 15-foot setback from any units or buildings constructed on this property from adjacent residences. If this were to develop as additional single-family homes, the minimum side yard setbacks could be 5 feet, and a rear yard would be 15. In addition, as a planned development, 20% of the site will have to be retained as open space at a minimum. So this slide provides just kind of a broad overview of the process that would be needed in order for this property to be developed as it's being proposed by Luke Dorf. So tonight we're here at this community meeting. This is an opportunity for us to hear concerns again from you and to try to provide, as Mike said, a level playing field in terms of information about the proposal. The board is tentatively anticipated to consider whether or not to transfer the land to Luke Dorf in mid to late March. So there will be an opportunity for you to weigh in at the board meeting. If the board approves the transfer at that time, then there would be a development review process. That's where I'm going to focus my attention here. And we'll go on to the next slide. Following that process, again, it's a public hearing. There will be opportunities for input into the process. Following that, assuming it were approved, then there will be additional construction permits, and then the development process would occur. And I know you won't be able to read this, so I'm just going to try to run through these fairly quickly. And again, I encourage you to grab one of those brochures on your way out. So, a land development process, there are 3 key opportunities for public engagement. That's really where I want to focus my attention tonight. The first would be what is called a neighborhood meeting. So a new development, and this one in particular, would require what is called a neighborhood meeting. Property owners within 500 feet of the property would receive a mailed notice of the meeting.
Just 500 feet? Is that all it's going to affect in this whole community?
I can tell
I
you
think
what
that
the
needs to go
requirements
to
are.
at least 2,000 to 3,000 feet.
So I can tell you what the requirements are.
I
So-
understand, but we don't like it.
That way they can comply with it.
If you do 500 feet, the rest of us don't know.
So this, the 500 feet actually exceeds the state minimum requirement.
Regardless,
And-
we're saying we don't
and
want that.
So we're going. So
We're
gonna
saying everybody
continue,
wants to know.
And again, if you put your name on our email list, you'll be alerted to it. We promise that. We also gave you a website address that you can track it, and we'll give you 2 more website addresses at the end of the meeting that you can continue to track it. So please allow us to continue with the presentation.
Where's the web
No,
address?
I'm gonna, please hold your question.
Why have to sign on? You should have mailed to them.
So-
You should have mailed to them.
Yeah, we could have had this information first. So that we can actually come here and ask the questions that are important to us and not listen to all of this because
So
we
I'm
don't
gonna-
know if it's going to happen.
I'm going to go back and refer. These are the questions that you said are important to you.
What did
That's
you
what
send
we're
out
here-
so we could ask the questions?
That's what we're here.
What did you send out?
Sorry. So if you'll allow us to continue, we will have time.
You didn't give us
to
the
provide
opportunity.
We'll have opportunity, once you have the information, to continue asking questions. So, thank you.
We'd like to hear the presentation. Yeah.
So,
Well, move up closer, lady. Oh, you're
the
so
property,
sweet.
so the requirement for the neighborhood meeting is that property owners within 500 feet will receive a mailed notice of the neighborhood meeting.
Anything done now?
We also, I would encourage you to visit our website. If you'll go to the county website and search for LUT Weekly Update, that's a weekly newsletter that we send out, and we do, as a courtesy, provide notice of neighborhood meetings. So that's an opportunity, another opportunity for folks who want to be involved to follow along with the process. As Mike said, the state requirement for notifying adjacent property owners is 100 feet for a development. We notify within 500 feet. So the neighborhood
All the
meeting,
parents. Yes.
So what would you like us to do? You have brought us these questions and comments and concerns.
Press it down is enough. Talk to people here.
That's what we're hoping to do, is give you the information, giving you the information so that you all have the right information so that when you do want to address and influence a decision, that information is accurate. It doesn't get discounted. So we'd like to get back to answering the key questions that you've provided us to date. Please hold your questions, write them down, and pass them over.
There is no packet.
so again, I think the faster we can get through the presentation, the more time we'll have for questions. I would just encourage everybody to hold your questions, please. So, the neighborhood meeting is the first step in the process. The neighborhood meeting is not a meeting that is required, that is not staffed by the county. It's an opportunity for neighbors to meet with the proposed developer to discuss concerns about the development. So there's another opportunity for you to get engaged early in the process before an application gets submitted to the county. Once an application does get submitted, following a neighborhood meeting, then there's a process whereby we would mail again public notice out to everyone within 500 feet, property owners within 500 feet of the upcoming hearing. And then there would be an opportunity for you to testify at a public hearing. So I want to talk a little bit about the land use process. It is a process really to determine if the proposed development complies with the requirements of the county community development code. And that's really the intent of the exercise. So there are standards in the code. This is an exercise in determining, does this proposal meet those standards? If the proposal meets those standards, then most likely it would be approved. But let me run through this. So in a type 3 process I mentioned earlier, it does require a public hearing. The decision maker for a type 3 hearing is not county staff. It would be what's called a hearings officer. The hearings officer is a land use attorney that's under contract to the county, but functions as an independent arbiter, essentially, of the development's compliance with the community development code. And so, again, there would be a public hearing. Anybody who wants to show up and testify is invited to do that. The notice was provided, again, will be provided to people within 500 feet, property owners within 500 feet. the decision of the hearings officer, let's say the development were approved and someone dislikes the decision, there is an appeal process to the Land Use Board of Appeals. That's a state board appointed by the governor. That is 3 land use attorneys who are essentially acting in a judicial capacity. And again, if someone were interested in appealing the land use approval, you would need to try to demonstrate that there's some provision of the development code that has not been adequately met by the proposed development. So I've glossed through these fairly quickly, and I apologize, but I want to, again, reserve as much time as we can for questions later. There is a 120-day process that's required by statute. So from the date an application is sent to the county and we determine that the information that's provided by the applicant is complete for us to take action on it, there's a 120-day statutory process, so we have to issue a decision within that 120-day period.
What day are we on?
We haven't gotten there yet. So we're not even on this chart yet, folks. Go back to the previous slide if you could. We're back at square one on the left here. The chart that we're looking at is a more detailed version of the first, second, third, fourth box from the left there, the development review process. So this is all future, if the proposal goes forward kind of stuff. But we wanted to provide a quick overview of how the land use process works, and again, with an emphasis on how you can get engaged in that process.
So you're saying you haven't been thinking this up for the last 10 years?
Maybe we should come back to that. I'm not sure I understood that. So, so again, this is a decision that would be made by a hearings officer. There are appeal opportunities. There are public involvement opportunities. And then is there? That's it. Okay. So I think that.
So there was another question that came from the community during the land use. So there's 2 questions here that it was brought to the group's attention that this could just be the start, that other buildings, multi-story buildings, additional residents could be added to this. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the restriction to keeping this to 6 units?
So based on the current zoning of the property, the R5 designation, and the size of this parcel, 6 units is the maximum that's allowed under the current zoning regulations. So that would limit the number of total units that are provided, and we discussed earlier, a unit is a single living unit, right, with its own eating and food prep and bathroom facilities, right? And so the development rules around this would limit the height of the buildings to what's allowed in the R5 district for a single family home. So I believe it's 30 feet is the maximum height limit. What's proposed, you'll get more information about that later, but it's significantly less than that. And but there are just a series of parameters around building height, setbacks from property lines and adjacent properties, screening requirements that would all come into play as a part of the development review.
So what would it take to rezone this? Would these folks be notified if there was any consideration to rezone this?
Yeah. So if there were a rezoning proposed of the property, that is a legislative process. That would actually require action by the Board of County Commissioners as well. That's a more complicated process. It requires public hearings both with our Planning Commission, who would make a recommendation on the proposed rezoning to the Board of Commissioners, and then the Board of Commissioners itself would have to act on a change in the zoning. That has not been proposed at this time.
Can you elaborate this is a private owned residence or is this running as a commercial?
So we will get to the residents, the applications,
That's
how
your
that
answer, no
application and
answer.
screening process occurs. Again, you've asked this question. We'd like to get to it. Thank you.
What percentage of the lot is supposed to be developed to start as a plan for design?
So the question was, I'm not going to take these, but what percentage of the lot? Again, you'll see that in the development proposal, very small percentage. As Stephen noted, there are required setbacks. There's a required dedication of open space. But Luke Dorf will talk to you about the plan, show you the plat layout, and that should answer some of those questions. So at this point, I would like to ask Lindsay, and we'll talk about the loop Dorf. And again, I want to say, these are the questions that you brought forth. These are what we had hoped to present information on so that everyone has the same level of information. As we get through this presentation, the more time we have for public questions, the more your responses will be met.
Good evening, everyone. Am I speaking loud enough, hopefully? Can everyone hear me? No? Is that better? Better? Okay. All right, so just to reintroduce myself, in case there's people that came in late, my name is Will Allen. I'm the Housing Operations Coordinator for Loop Dorf. This is my colleague, Lindsay Downage. She's one of our clinical directors, and we're going to be kind of running through our presentation. It's going to kind of talk about what we're proposing, the population, our screening process, and again, kind of like what Mike was just saying, a lot of it is based around the feedback that we've gotten through emails and phone calls. So we're really trying to focus on the stuff that we've heard a lot already from everyone in this crowd. A huge part of that is safety, and we totally get that, and that's a big thing that we really want to address. So again, so if, like I said, and so we want to be able to move forward through it and explain that, and then hopefully be able to take some more of those questions after we're done with the presentation.
So as Will said, I'm Lindsay Downen. I'm one of the clinical directors for Loop Dorf. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start by speaking a little bit about Loop Dorf as an organization, what we do. We are a mental health nonprofit in Washington County. We are entering our 40th year of service serving Washington County. We also operate throughout the Portland metropolitan area, so we serve individuals in Multnomah County as well, and on occasion, folks who live in the northwestern geographic region of Clackamas County. We focus on adults. So I do want to emphasize, we do not serve children or families. We serve adults with mental illness. We also operate a very diverse portfolio of programs. Those programs, which Will is going to talk about a little bit more in detail, have housing implications, and well, he'll speak about our housing continuum because we operate a lot of different types of housing programs. We also offer clinic-based services, so individuals who come into a clinic to receive mental health services. We also operate peer-based services and peer-based programs in Washington County. And another thing that we do, and we are the only provider in Washington County that does this, is we provide outreach to homeless individuals. So that is a big component of why we are up here this evening.
We really do have a super diverse portfolio. I could really speak at length about that, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. Before we move on from this slide, the thing that I really want to emphasize is what Lindsay was just talking about, which is the continuum of housing. What I'm talking about there is really the fact that there's a lot of different people that are at different phases in their recovery from mental illness, right? And there's different programs, I guess you would say, and types of housing that are right for everyone depending on where they are. And that can range from super intensive programs that clinical staff build right into it, 24-hour staffing, all the way out to fully independent living that, apartments with landlord-tenant lease agreements, people are paying their own rent and are fully employed, right? And so I want to emphasize on this is that we're talking about the fully independent end of that spectrum. And that's super important to continue to develop throughout Washington County as people come through our programs, through Washington County programs, through other nonprofits, that they're kind of filtered into the areas that are most appropriate for them. Because first, that's important for the community, of course, and it's also really important for those clients, because if we put them in a situation that's not appropriate, people aren't going to succeed and thrive.
Facilities have been closed before their useful life is up.
Can you repeat the question, please?
The question was how many
Loop Dorf facilities have been closed before the end of their useful life?
How many Loop Dorf facilities have been closed before the end of their useful life?
Yeah, write it down and he'll put it up here.
You write it down, but we have not had any facilities closed.
Ever?
No.
What about 2008 tunnel houses for Cornelius? I have an article here. They shut down Cornelius.
So you,
Bravo.
let us
Good
research.
research. Good research.
We'll welcome them.
I got a bunch here,
We'll
too.
We'll welcome that information because that contributes to the general community knowledge of this process and this project. So thank you.
So I'm gonna move on, but we noted it and we will come back to that because we may also address that further as we go on. So what is being proposed for the Clover Court project is 6 apartment units between 3 duplexes. And in a minute you will see a photo of what that will look like, the proposal. Again, the target population is adults who identify as having a severe mental illness. And ultimately, what a severe mental illness speaks to is individuals whose mental health symptoms are relatively persistent. They're not episodic. It's not something that just simply goes away over a period of time. And because there is some persistence to those symptoms, the recovery process could simply take longer. Now, the other requirement to get into Clover Court is you have to meet the HUD definition of chronic homelessness. The HUD definition of chronic homelessness means you have had to be on the streets and literally homeless for a minimum of 12 months, or you would have had 4 separate instances of homelessness over the duration of a 3-year period of time.
How do they prove that to qualify?
Some questions.
I'll touch on that in just a moment.
Write it down. Write it down.
So the question that she asked, because I think that's what you're about to ask as well, is that how do they define that? And we are going to get to that. That is in an upcoming slide very shortly. Yes, correct. Yep. So it'd be 1 person in each unit because they're studio apartments is the proposal. So one thing I want to move on from there is I know everyone knows that there's an affordable housing crisis within the Portland area, right? There's no question about that. And I will say that almost every single email that I received personally, someone at least mentioned that they were like, we do care about this issue and we think it's something that needs to be taken care of. What I really want to do though is to look at some of the numbers that are around this to really flesh this out. So looking within the metro area, of all the homeless individuals who experience mental illness, half of them are unsheltered. Right? Unsheltered means no transitional housing, they're not staying in a shelter overnight, they're on the street, no matter the weather, rain or shine. Right? Half. So that part of the population is really disproportionately represented in that amount compared to other homeless populations that tend to get better services and access to those overnight shelters. Moving on from that, if you look...
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We do. Not this way. Correct. Woo!
Thank you. And it's evident.
11-year-old rape, 21-year-old rape.
Yes.
The vetting process is terrible.
And he was
Yes.
night prowling in a car 2 months before the rapes. He
And
came and went out of their facility.
And that
I have it here in
tragedy,
proof.
and that tragedy we all understand, and none of us ever want to see it repeated.
We don't want it in our neighborhood.
When you talk about the appropriateness, we've identified these key safety elements. Let us talk about them, and let's.
Why is Washington County screening to the people that are building these homes in our neighborhood?
That's a.
Needs to be held accountable for being next to our schools. If you're going to put them in our neighborhood, how do we know that they are doing their job? Because they have proven that they are not doing their
That's
job.
correct. They have a rich history in not taking care of the people that live there.
Again,
Dorf
thank
is negligent.
We can see and hear your passion. We can see and hear your concerns.
We're not
So
going to trust you again.
And we ask you not to trust us. We ask you to have. We ask you.
Mission accomplished.
We ask you to have the same basis of understanding that we do about this process. We ask you to continue to be engaged in this process. I'm not about to ask you to trust me. I'm asking you to listen to the information so that you have accurate information with
Sir,
which
it's
to
not you,
approach
it's
this
Luke
question.
Dorf.
And-
It's not you we don't trust, it's Luke Dorf.
And this is not a question of them. Homeless people are part of our community too. So let's continue on.
So I just want to be able to move on because, again, a lot of the questions that we're hearing are going to be addressed in the upcoming slides.
Now get to it, please. Come on.
Okay.
Move it along.
Next slide.
It's time.
So,
6 people on an acre, 1.2 acres, that's not very good population density, I don't believe.
so we're going to, that will be partly addressed as well. So, okay, so being able to move on, again, there's, looking at 2016, the report on homelessness from Washington County, at any point in time, you're approaching 2,000 households that are homeless or at severe risk of homelessness, and we know specifically in the Beaverton-Aloha area, you're looking at a 2.6% vacancy rate. So even for people that can actually afford to rent in the market, it's still extremely hard to find housing, and we all know that. All of these reasons are why we're super dedicated to that 10-year plan to end homelessness that Annette spoke about earlier, and that we're a really important partner in that and see why it's so needed with our community. Okay, so just kind of going over some relevant site information. I think everyone knows where the site is, but again, to reiterate, it's at the corner of Southwest Bainey and Southwest 170th.
It's in our neighborhood. We
Again,
know where it is.
it's okay. Sorry, I'm going to move on. So again, zoning's R5, which is 6 units. It's 1.29 acres. Okay, so 400 square feet is what we see each unit being sized in. And we have chosen that size because from our experience, that's kind of what we call the Goldilocks zone for this population. And that's in specific to that. It's large enough that people that haven't had their own personal space for a while can really nest. And then at the same time, not too large, that's overwhelming for someone. Right? At this point in time, we're also going to have a fourth building that we're proposing that would have a laundry, a community room, as well as an on-site office for our staff to be able to meet with people if they're engaging in our services. And finally, at this point in time, again, because it's so early in the process, there is no construction contractor assigned to this project. We are currently partnered with Scott Edwards and Associates, Scott Edwards Architecture, sorry, and they've provided some really preliminary site design type stuff. So the real quick overview of the schedule that was proposed is that the land donation will happen in the spring.
We don't want it.
We're
We don't want it.
proposing
We're going to
that
try to stop
hopefully
it.
looking, if this was to go forward, it would be construction starting in the fall, and then with completion sometime next year in 2018, in the spring or summer, with the lease up sometime by next fall, 2018.
So is that what taxis paying for this?
So I wanted to show some of the renderings that our architect came up with to kind of show what is currently envisioned. So as you can see, there's the 3 duplexes. They're placed in on a court. That's again why it's called Clover Court. Not empty now, directly under the street. And we also have the parking lot. If you want to move on to the next one. So this is an actual site plan design that's proposed. So you can see the 4th building there on the right. Again, that's laundry, community room, and staff facilities. So the idea that where people can congregate and hopefully meet for services.
Come on!
Sorry. No, we don't have, because the original proposal, because we have HUD dollars attached to the proposal of the project, that limits it at 6 units, and the zoning is limited to 6 units.
Can we get to the questions that we're all here to ask questions.
We've gone now an hour with this.
We don't need to see plans.
Yeah, again,
so you're a minority.
Once again, if you'll allow us to address the questions that you've already presented, then we will get to your questions as well.
Please do so, please.
I'm going to ask you to hold so we can finish asking these questions.
Right. So again, just to really scan quickly, this is just a preliminary site plan. The idea is that they would be ADA accessible for anyone that has any mobility issues. And again, they're kind of faced in this direction because we think it suits the population and it increases people's privacy. So we can move on.
So the screening portion, to talk about who would be eligible to live on site, is a very detailed screening process. It is a 3-part process. All individuals who have identified as homeless and seeking services or housing in Washington County currently go through what's called a Community Connect referral and assessment process. So, at that point, they work with Community Action in Beaverton or Hillsborough and complete an initial referral and assessment. And those individuals who are doing that process look at all resources available to the individual because they want to find the best fit. And we will communicate to Community Action and Community Connect what we are looking for in terms of individuals on the property. And again, we are going to get to that. Those would be adult, single individuals who show and demonstrate that despite struggling with maybe a severe mental illness, they are ready to be on a lease, to live independently, and to return to potential employment, be active citizens within the community.
Who pays the rent?
So they're going to be living on their own with nobody watching them?
So,
Well, this guy sure loves
so
it.
I want to talk about the secondary layer of the screening because I think that. That's a question I'd like to hold. So again, I want to address the secondary process. So again, it's really important to know that all of that screening criteria is going to be given to Community Connect, and that they're incentivized to send people who are appropriate for that actual program, whatever the program may be, whether it's this one or another, along those lines. Because if someone comes and they're not going to meet their criteria, they're going to get denied, right? And that's a waste of their time, it's a waste of our time. So specifically, we have property management in-house, right? And per our screening criteria, which if you have the FAQ that you picked up, there's actually a link to our website. You can see the entire 5-page document in all of its detail. The areas that I really want to cover, because they're by far the ones that we've received the most concern about, are first, illegal drug use. This is not a halfway house. It's not designed for drug addiction. If at any point in time anyone suspected of having illegal drug use, their application will be denied. If we ever see that there's someone that's actually in a unit having illegal drug use, then that can result in an eviction, right? The second thing I want to move
Who
on
is going to
to
know it?
is that there will be no
Who's gonna know
felony
it?
convictions allowed of any kind, violent or non-violent. It doesn't matter. That will be totally screened out from that process.
Why don't we invite them to your house?
Marijuana.
Yes, it does include marijuana.
Be
because-
quiet for a few minutes and let these people make their
And
presentation.
we'll vote you out.
Please be quiet. So everyone
We'll
can
vote
hear
you
what
out
you're
if
here.
you silence
Please
me.
be quiet.
You need to go. District 1, Dick
I
Stout
only have
needs
a
to
few
go.
minutes. I can't
So-
stay the whole meeting, and I'd really like to listen to them. So
You
could you
go right
please be
ahead.
quiet?
You go right ahead, but no,
I live closer to
thank
this
you.
than you do.
No, you
I go to
don't.
church.
You don't know where I live.
Okay, you're right, I don't, but I go to
So,
church
again,
across the street from this place.
We've had these questions asked. There are many people here who would like to hear the responses to these 4 questions.
I'm
So
obviously younger than you.
I ask that you hold those comments, please. Thank you.
But there was a really good question that was just asked, which is, does that include marijuana? And yes, it does. Since there's federal dollars attached to this, we go with the federal law, so there is no marijuana use allowed either at this location. So I'm going to keep on going. So, and then the final one that I really want to put is that if any kind of sexual offense of any kind of the background check comes up, that's also an immediate denial of application, whether it's a misdemeanor all the way up to felony, right? And not only is that our policy, but on top of that, that fits in with the state of Oregon law. A registered sex offender could never live at a location like this because it is too close to community locations like schools. That's gonna come up. So that will be addressed, because I know it's a concern.
So if an individual successfully screens with Community Connect, goes through the property management application and screening process, they are then referred to services with Dorf, but they are also referred and eligible for services with any of our colleague agencies. Because I do want to mention, we are just one of multiple mental health agencies within the community. So there are always the possibility that someone could be enrolled in services with one of our colleague agencies, which could include Sequoia Mental Health or LifeWorks Northwest.
Do they live there?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said, I misheard you.